Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on the newest of my worm bins, which is all the way down there in the lower right corner. So the way I've got things arranged here is that the oldest of my systems are over here on the left, and then I kind of follow this sweeping, zigzagging pattern to arrive at the newest of my systems. And the newest of my systems is very often, in the very beginning, still sort of tied to its parent. And in this case, we're still in that relationship where that newest system, which is actually the worms that came out of Outdoor Worm Bag version 6.0, the contents of the worm bag were emptied into this tray up here in order to facilitate the migration of the worms out of their compost. And then 23 days ago, when we launched off the new system, we were fairly certain that not all the worms had been hauled out. So we deployed this thing that I refer to as a bait box in the hopes that we can, lure the worms out of the material, any of the stragglers that were left behind, and to try to motivate them to come up into the bait box, which has some nice damp bedding, some food in it. I've been aerating the compost and allowing it to dry so that it becomes less and less hospitable for worms to remain in. And now, over 3 weeks later, 23 days later, I believe that the time has come to just remove that bait box and reunite the stragglers with the worms in the new box. So I'm fairly confident that we've got all the worms, but I will pick out the last of the stragglers from the compost, include them in the bait box, which we'll empty into the new system after we get them fed today. So let's get the bait box removed first, and any stragglers we could pick off the surface, and then treat that as a done deal, and then we'll move on to feeding the new system. So let's get to work. So now the new system's down here on the bottom, and before I forget, I didn't write it down, but so far, based on the input I've gotten from 11 viewers and their comments, as well as my estimate, all averaged together, the estimated population of the new system is now 2395 worms. And then whatever worms we add into here from the emptying of the bait box will slightly increase the population size. So as we usually do, I'll be turning to you guys, the viewers, to provide me with a comment once we release this batch of stragglers into the main system, and I'll do my best to show the worms. And is that even a worm? Is that a centipede or a millipede? My hope is that by this time the majority of the worms have exited their castings due to the material getting drier and drier and drier over time. And I believe that the last time I came in here to aerate and to even moisten, and I think maybe even add some more food to the bait box, it was, I don't know, quite a few days ago at this point. And here and there I would still find a worm, as we're doing now. Once in a while you still find a worm right beneath the bait box because the moisture there is still hanging on, but the moisture out here is pretty much history. So luckily this stuff is fairly dry. It's not going to stick much to my hands. I'll get a glove on once we get to feeding the new system. And you can see this material's got little bits of this and that in it. If I really wanted to have a nice, debris-free batch of vermicompost here, I can certainly run this stuff through my screen, or just treat what's in here as bonus material, like additional organic material that'll continue to break down over time, providing the microorganisms and other creatures in the material with nourishment. And, it is springtime, and soon the garden will begin. So this material will very likely get put to use pretty soon, either here in my garden, or perhaps it'll get gifted to some other friends or family of mine who are into gardening. But I believe at this point this will be the end of Outdoor Worm Bag version 6 in terms of getting the wormies out of their material and considering their material as a now harvested batch of worm castings. So let's get this out of the way, and I'll get a glove on to give them their feeding, which is what you see right here. So let's get to work. Let's see, what was I about to say? Lost my train of thought there. Oh yeah, so gosh, I lost my train of thought again. I'm such an airhead. Whatever, it'll come back to me. I've got my prepared bedding up on the shelf right behind me, which we can include with today's feeding, and I've also got what you might have noticed earlier, a couple soiled napkins here to include with the feeding. And all right, now we're starting to see some wormies. When we set up the migration to get the worms to come out of their finished compost and get hauled out, we had set up a little partition between the horizontal migration feeding zone and the finished castings, and that piece of cardboard that was the little partition was torn up into little pieces and included in the feeding as supplemental bedding down here. So I think this is what we're encountering right here already. Some of these larger chunks of cardboard are going to be that. And I'm starting to get a little whiff. I'm starting to smell the scent of some of the stuff we placed in here as part of their last feeding. And well, the first check-in came 12 days after the system was launched. And then now we're 11 days downstream of the first check-in. And even before the worms got placed into this bin, I had put some material in there, some food in there to welcome them. So that counted as feeding number 1 on launch day, 23 days ago. And then feeding number 2 came in at that first check-in, 11 days ago. So today on day 23, they're going to be receiving feeding number 3. And I guess my impression from reviewing the video from the last check-in was that it didn't seem like the worms had really come out for that first feeding. So we went through the feeding zone, didn't really see a whole lot of worm activity. It kind of made me question the estimates that we came up with. It seemed like perhaps we didn't have quite as many worms based on just watching the last check-in, but now as I'm going through this feeding zone where I'm still seeing a few leftovers like this grape, I'm definitely getting the sense that we probably do have a population in here that's kind of in that 2395? I don't know. If I'm misremembering or misstating anything, I'll just flash a correction on the screen, but that was a pretty healthy size population for a container this size. And it was for that reason I figured I'd be pretty generous with the feedings. But luckily, even if the feedings that we give them start to run a little bit low, there's always all the lovely leafy matter and cardboard and paper shreds of which the system is built that the worms can turn to also treat as nourishment and food. And the moisture level in here is pretty nice too. I've been finding that most of my systems do have a pretty good moisture level, and it seems like my water bottle's just been getting less and less attention lately, just sitting here all charged up, full of water and all charged up and hardly any need for it. And you know what? Since part of what we're giving them today includes a full day's worth of coffee plus the coffee filter, we're just going to take this old feeding zone indicator and sort of promote it to now be down here in the feeding zone, kind of making me question if we even need to add any more bedding, because don't forget, all this material in here is mainly bedding. Over the past 23 days, the worms that did, the stragglers that did come out of the finished castings and gather up here in the bait box, didn't really put too much of a dent into the bedding that was placed in here for them. And as you can see, we've got a pretty good turnout. I'm already starting to formulate a little bit of a number in my mind in terms of how many worms we succeeded in baiting out of the finished castings, and a good many of them are just little itsy bitsy tiny ones. Look at them all. Very small worms. Babies, you know. So I mean, that in itself is already a really good sign in my book. As the warmer weather starts to move in, it does seem like the worms become a little bit more active. I don't really have any heat down here in my basement, so the temperature varies with the temperatures outside, and more the basement is becoming a somewhat warmer space and more comfortable space for the worms to be in. See, look at them all, little suckers all over the place. And besides becoming more active and being able to break down more and more material for me, I do believe that in the warmer weather the worms also feel a little bit more comfortable and might be more prone to mating. I really don't know, but I like to think that there's a good bit of mating going on here just based on what I'm seeing as far as little itsy bitsy baby worms in here. So some of the vermicompost that has formed in here over the past 23 days since we set it up to bait stragglers is sort of sticking to the bottom of the container and giving these little itsy bitsy worms a place to hide. I guess I have the option to do something with these worms. If I feel like I've not gotten all of them, maybe I could just take the plastic tray outside and rinse it off in my garden so that any worms that are still hiding out within the material that's sticking to the container will have somewhere to be other than getting rinsed down my drain. So I think this will probably get rinsed off outside. But I think that's that. I think we're going to treat that as the official end now of the outdoor worm bag version 6.0, with the last of the stragglers getting introduced to this nicely populated container. And I think we could proceed to giving them their meal, and then we'll be done. So let's take these two pretty heavily soiled pieces of paper towel in addition to the reused feeding zone indicator. The meal today is pretty much just some chunks of Savoy cabbage. A lot of it is like the inner core right here, more of that right here, as well as some of these outer leaves that were not in the best of shape to be prepared into a meal. So those became worm food. The rest of it all became a tasty human meal. So we'll set this feeding zone indicator aside. Well, right now it's still just a coffee filter, but as soon as we rest it out on top to show ourselves where we fed, it will officially become a feeding zone indicator. So in new systems, I like to be pretty generous with the application of grit, and that's what I just sprinkled in there. Just some pulverized eggshell that the worms could use as grit to help break down the foods that they're eating. And now we can go to the outer edges and start bringing in a little bit of the material from there to get it aerated, take a look at how the worms in there are doing, and cover up the feeding zone. Leveling off along the way, and then we'll be done. Alright, well, not a very large application of bedding today. In brand new systems, I just feel like they're already surrounded by tons and tons of bedding anyway. And not only that, but I do feel like I've been very generous with bedding in a lot of my newer systems lately running me into a situation where I feel like I've kind of used up a lot of the available space in the container, perhaps a little bit too rapidly, and I'd like to try to slow down the pace a little bit and not allow that to occur here if possible, if I can keep tabs on my generosity. So how many worms do you think we just added in there? I know it was a little bit difficult to see, but I'm already formulating a number in my mind, but I'm usually not going to share that estimate with you guys. I'd rather just see what you guys think without any input from me. So please leave a comment. Let me know how many worms you believe we added to this system now. And I'm starting to get a feeling like we might have, at this point, pushed the worm count in this system up to the maybe 2,500 worm range. I don't know. It'll depend on what you guys say, so please leave a comment. That's it for the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.